Tokala would be the one word, if you had to choose just one word that best described George Tall, it would be Tokala. And when he was born on December 20th, 1950, till when he left here to return home, August 26, 2011, George exemplified the life of a Tokala. He was also, like I mentioned in the previous video, the Nacha, the head man or chief of the Tokala Okola Kiche, the Kit Fox Warrior Society from Wounded District. He did a lot of things for his community and for the land in his lifetime. And then he also exemplified one of the four core Lakota virtues, generosity. And it's not only because of everything that George did for Yellow Thunder Camp, but also everything he did for me on a personal level that kind of moves me to make these videos, to make sure that there's something that's documented in his memory. Just to give an example of the kind of man that George was, there was a time several years ago when the mother of my kids took off and took the only running vehicle that we had in the winter time, left us stranded way out in the hills down Pepper Creek, and George was wondering why he hadn't seen me for so long, and then he came out there to check up on us, and when he saw us, he packed up a bunch of our stuff and moved up to White Horse Creek, just right across the road from the school there, to his house, and gave me and my kids his bedroom, and until I was able to get things straightened out and get a vehicle of my own, then he opened his house up to my kids and I. That's the kind of person that George was. And it's not the only thing that he did for me, or the only act of friendship that he showed over the years. But I think that's a good example of the life that he lived. And then some few years after that, he gave his house to one of his sons, and then he moved in with his older sister, Beatty. He's never been one to hoard things or to, he's never been a stingy person. So in the white way of looking at somebody, he was destitute, but then in the Lakota way, he was a real rich man. Because in Lakota thinking, or in Lakota society, you don't gain wealth by the stuff that you accumulate or hoard. You gain wealth by the things that you give away. And then we believe that when your physical body dies and you leave this place and you go back home to be with the Creator in the spirit world or heaven, whatever you want to call it, everything that you gave away is there waiting for you and multiplied too, so you have everything that you gave and more. So we know that right now George is a wealthy person and that he's doing real well. I think of all the things that he did, probably the one thing that was most controversial and that will be remembered the most was when the Tokala Okola Kiche tried to protect Lakota ceremonies and Lakota culture from being stolen from our children and auctioned off to the highest bidder. I wasn't there when the story that I'm going to tell you happened, but I'm going to try to remember it the best I can. The way that George told me about it afterwards, that he and I think his brother Earl went with him, and they went to this one older medicine man in Wounded Knee District, and I won't mention his name, but they went to him because the Tokalas were starting up a youth camp in Manderson, and they asked this old man, this medicine man, to come there to tell these kids some stories. A lot of these kids were blood relatives of his, and maybe to show them some different plant medicines and that, but he didn't seem interested in doing this, and he kept trying to find a way out of it. And while they were there visiting, this white woman drove up in a nice car, and right away he jumped up and ran out to meet her and was saying stuff like, "Oh, you finally made it, okay, well, let's get going, I know you're in a hurry." And they said that you could see that that woman didn't have a clue what he was talking about, but he rushed her into the car, told those guys, "Well, why don't you go ask this other medicine man." I won't mention his name either, but they were disappointed in him. They went to see this other medicine man. It was basically the same kind of a story, and so they start thinking about it, and they realized that the ceremonies and the knowledge that these medicine men were given, it doesn't belong to them. It's not their private property. They're pretty much just servants, and these things belong to the Lakota people and to our future generations. And as a Kichita, a real Akichita, not like most people use that word nowadays to mean an Indian or non-Indian who takes money to go to somebody else's home and terrorize them and kill them for the white man. But being Tokalas and true Akichita, they took it on themselves to try and put an end to these medicine men and so-called spiritual leaders from prostituting Lakota ceremony and acting like pimps over our religion and selling out to rich white people. And so they tried to stop non-Indians from participating in sundances. And there were a lot of medicine men or so-called medicine men who were against that because they were making money and they were getting things from these white people. There's one that I will mention in particular, David Swallow, who spends a lot of time down in Colorado, and he was charging $3,000 and more for white people to come up by Porcupine to dance in his Sundance. And this particular individual even hired white FBI agents and Denver City Police to be his security. So he brought an army of white people onto Pine Ridge Reservation to protect him from the Oglala Lakota people. And there was a lot of threats. These white people pulled guns on the Tokalas. Their guns were taken away. But this was the atmosphere. This is what happened, and this is the extreme that some people will go to steal Lakota culture from the Lakota children and sell it to rich non-Indians. Meanwhile, they're neglecting their own nephews and nieces and grandchildren and all the youth in our communities who these ceremonies and that were meant for. He did a lot of other things in his life, teaching hand games to kids at Wounded Knee District School in Manderson, and working with the Lakota Landowners Alliance and at Stronghold Table. I mentioned that one before, and then of course here in the Black Hills at Yellow Thunder Camp. But I think it's important when a man who is strong enough that he doesn't try to promote himself or make money off of the suffering that our people are going through. A person lives his whole life like that and does everything he can, fighting all of the poverty and the conditions and the housing clusters on the reservation, um, the racism that's rampant around here, and they do all this for nothing else than for a love of their people and the land. And I think it's important that someone like that is acknowledged. And George was exactly that kind of man.